She was screaming his name. Her voice cracked, echoing down the empty street, carrying the kind of terror that makes strangers stop and stare. Marcus Green's face was pressed hard against the hood of a police cruiser. Blue lights washed over his skin, painting him in flashes of guilt he hadn't earned. And in front of him, the one he loved most, his wife, Tasha, stood frozen, her arms half raised, unsure if lowering them would make things worse. The officer's hand lingered on her shoulder a beat too long. His smirk wasn't the kind of smirk you forget. Phones were out, neighbors were watching, some whispered, some shouted, but most just filmed, knowing this kind of scene could end in tragedy. Marcus strained against the cold metal, his voice trembling with both fury and fear. "Let her go! Don't touch her again!" The officer didn't move. He leaned closer to Marcus, whispering words the crowd couldn't hear. But whatever was said drained the color from Marcus's face. For the first time that night, his rage gave way to silence. And then, the screen freezes. How did it come to this? A hard-working husband pinned to the hood of a squad car, a wife humiliated in front of her own neighbors, and an officer smiling as if the outcome was already written. This wasn't random. This wasn't chance. What unfolded on that night in Raleigh was part of something much larger, something most people would never have believed until they saw it with their own eyes. But let's step back, because to understand why Marcus stood bleeding under the glow of flashing lights, you need to know the kind of man he was before that night. You need to know how an ordinary couple, people who paid their bills, raised their kids, went to church on Sundays, ended up at the center of a storm that would divide an entire city. And before we uncover that story, ask yourself something. What would you have done? If a stranger in uniform humiliated the person you loved most, right there in front of you, would you stand silent? Would you stay calm and hope for mercy? Or would you fight back, even if the world was watching, even if the price was your freedom? Pause for a moment, because this isn't just their story. It's a question for every one of us. Drop your answer in the comments. Would you have stayed silent or fought back? And if you want the truth as it really unfolded, if you want to see how deep this story runs, subscribe right now. Because when the full picture finally came to light, it changed everything. Now, back to that night. The crowd was restless. You could hear the murmurs. Why's he messing with her like that? Ain't right, man. Some shouted for the officer to stop. Others urged Marcus to stay calm. But Marcus wasn't calm. Every nerve in his body was screaming to protect his wife. He could see Tasha's eyes glistening with tears. She wasn't crying yet, but she was close. And then came the breaking point. The officer's hand shifted lower, brushing against her arm in a way that wasn't procedure, wasn't necessary, wasn't right. Marcus snapped. His body surged forward, muscles straining against the officer's grip. For a split second it looked like he might break free. But more blue lights appeared, another cruiser, then another, reinforcements. Tasha screamed again, "Stop, please, he didn't do anything." And that's when Marcus realized, no matter what he said, no matter how hard he fought to prove his innocence, the story was already being written without him. But here's the truth no one knew in that moment. This wasn't the first time they'd crossed paths with this officer. And what happened before this night was far more dangerous than anyone watching realized, because the seeds of this confrontation had been planted weeks earlier, and once planted, they couldn't be stopped from growing. And just like that, the chapter closes on silence. The crowd waits. Marcus waits. Tasha waits. The officer leans in one last time, whispering into Marcus's ear. The words are too low for the camera to catch, but whatever was said made Marcus's eyes go wide. And if you think you know what happened next, you don't. Comment below. What do you think the officer whispered? Before that night of flashing lights and raised voices, before Marcus Green's name was etched into headlines, he was just a man trying to live a quiet life. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't powerful. He didn't have connections downtown. What he had was a steady job at a distribution warehouse on the edge of Raleigh, North Carolina, the kind of job that left his shoulders aching by sundown, but kept the bills paid and food on the table. And what he had more than anything was Tasha. She worked as a school counselor, the person kids turned to when home life was too heavy to carry alone. Tasha had a way of listening without judgment, a way of looking at you that made you feel seen. Together, they were the kind of couple neighbors pointed to as an example, present at church on Sundays, grilling hot dogs at block parties, cheering at Friday night basketball games for kids who weren't even their own. They weren't perfect, but they were stable, grounded, safe. At least, that's what they believed. One evening after dinner, Tasha leaned across the table, resting her hand on Marcus's. "As long as we're together, we're safe," she told him. Marcus nodded, but deep down he wondered if that was true. Because safety wasn't guaranteed. Not for people who looked like them, not in neighborhoods where one wrong encounter could change everything. And as those words left her lips, a pair of headlights idled outside their window just a little too long, the sound of an engine, steady, low, refusing to move on. Marcus noticed first. He glanced at the curtains, his jaw tightening. But when he looked back at Tasha, he forced a smile. He didn't want her to see the worry. Moments later, the headlights finally rolled down the street, but the unease didn't leave with them. The next morning, life returned to normal, or so it seemed. Marcus clocked in at the warehouse, joked with his co-workers, stacked pallets until his back screamed for relief. But while he worked, the memory of those headlights wouldn't leave him. They'd been too still, too deliberate. And he wondered, was it just a car turning around, or was it someone watching? Later that week, Tasha brought home papers from the school. She spoke about a student who had lost a parent, about trying to guide the child through grief. Marcus admired her for carrying that kind of weight. But as she talked, she didn't notice the envelope on the kitchen counter. Unmarked. Plain. He had picked it up from the mailbox that afternoon, and though he hadn't opened it yet, he felt something about it was wrong. He tucked it under a pile of unopened bills before she could see. He told himself it was nothing. But in the quiet hours of the night, Marcus stared at the ceiling, wide awake, while the envelope remained untouched downstairs. On the surface, their life looked ordinary, but behind closed doors, questions began to form. Questions they didn't yet dare ask. Because sometimes the danger isn't what you see in front of you, it's what's watching from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was late on a Sunday night when Marcus and Tasha first crossed paths with Officer Brandon Hayes. They had just left church, dressed in their Sunday best, laughing quietly in the car about something their pastor had said. For a moment, it was pure ease, the kind of laughter couples remember years later. Then the blue lights appeared in the rearview mirror. Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He hadn't been speeding. He hadn't rolled through a stop sign. But he knew the rules. Pull over, stay calm, make no sudden moves. Tasha fell silent beside him. The car slowed to a stop. Hayes stepped out, adjusting his belt with the slow confidence of someone who knew he had all the power in the world. He tapped his flashlight against the window, though it wasn't needed. The street lamp above lit everything clearly. Marcus rolled the window down. His voice was low, respectful. "Evening, officer. Was I speeding?" Hayes didn't answer. He shined the light directly in Tasha's eyes, forcing her to squint and look away. "Step out of the car," he said. Not to Marcus, but to her. Tasha froze. Did I do something wrong?" Hayes smirked, the kind of smirk that makes your stomach tighten. "Just routine." Marcus wanted to protest, but one look from Tasha stopped him. They both knew what could happen if he pushed too hard. She opened the door slowly, the cool night air rushing in. The officer circled her like a predator sizing up its prey. He asked where she worked, if she lived around here, if she always dressed this nice after church. None of the questions had anything to do with traffic laws. Marcus gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles whitened. He wanted to say something. He wanted to stop this. But every time he opened his mouth, The officer's hand drifted closer to his holster, as if daring him. And then Hayes leaned in, lowering his voice just enough that Marcus could hear, but the recording body cam couldn't. "Stay in your place." The words cut deeper than any shout could have. Marcus's jaw clenched. He wanted to swing open that car door and put himself between them, but he also knew exactly how that would end, with Tasha widowed and his kids fatherless. So he sat, shaking, burning with a rage he could not release. Finally, after dragging out the humiliation longer than anyone thought necessary, Hayes let her go. No ticket, no written warning, just a final smirk as he tapped the roof of the car. "You can go." And just like that, the blue lights disappeared into the night, leaving behind silence far heavier than before. Tasha climbed back into the car. She didn't speak. Neither did Marcus. The only sound was the hum of the engine as he drove home, but her hands were trembling, and Marcus saw it. That was the night the seed was planted, the moment they realized safety could be taken away in an instant. He thought it was over. He thought it was just one bad encounter, one officer with too much power. But he was wrong. This was only the beginning, and the next time Officer Hayes appeared, the stakes would be far higher. The morning after that traffic stop, Marcus could barely look at his wife. Not because of shame, though that weighed heavy, but because of the tremor still in her hands. Tasha tried to hide it. She set the table, poured coffee, packed the kids' lunches, all while pretending nothing had happened. But Marcus noticed. He always noticed. And that was the moment he decided staying silent wasn't an option. At lunch, during his warehouse shift, he stepped outside and dialed the number of a man he thought he could trust, Detective Raymond Carter. Carter wasn't just some badge downtown. He had grown up in the same part of Raleigh as Marcus. Their mothers knew each other from church. Over the years, Carter had attended cookouts, dropped off Christmas gifts for Marcus's kids, even pulled Marcus aside once to say, "If you ever need anything, call me. I'll look out for you." This was that moment. So Marcus told him everything, how the officer had stopped them for no reason, how he shined a light in Tasha's face, how he whispered those words that felt more like a threat than an order. Carter listened. He sighed heavily. And finally he said, "File a formal complaint. I'll make sure it gets to the right desk." For the first time since the stop, Marcus felt a flicker of relief. That night, he and Tasha sat together at the kitchen table filling out the paperwork. Line after line, box after box, Marcus wrote down exactly what had happened. Tasha signed it too, her handwriting shaky but determined. When it was finished, Marcus sealed the envelope and told her, "This is how we do it, the right way. They can't ignore this." But Tasha wasn't convinced. She stared at him for a long moment before whispering, "What if it just makes it worse?" Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. "We have to believe the system works, Tash. If we don't, then what's left?" She didn't answer. Days passed, then weeks. Marcus called Carter again. "Any updates?" The answer was always the same. "It's being reviewed. Don't worry, I'm on it." But worry was all Marcus could do, because while the paperwork sat gathering dust in some office, the sight of that same patrol car in their neighborhood became harder to ignore. Hayes didn't hide. He cruised slowly past their street. Sometimes he parked at the corner. Sometimes he just stared. Each time, Marcus's chest tightened. Each time, Tasha pulled the curtains closed a little quicker. Then came the official word. A letter in the mail. Officer Brandon Hayes has been cleared of wrongdoing. No explanation. No acknowledgement of their words. Just a cold conclusion that said, without saying, "Your voices don't matter." Marcus crushed the paper in his fist. He wanted to storm into the precinct and demand answers. He wanted to call Carter and ask how he could let this happen. But when he dialed, Carter didn't answer. Not that day, not the next. And slowly, a new thought began to take root. Maybe Carter hadn't just failed him. Maybe Carter had never been on his side at all. That evening, Marcus walked to the mailbox before dinner. bills, a grocery flyer, and one plain white envelope with no return address. He turned it over in his hands. No stamp, which meant it hadn't been mailed. It had been placed there, directly. He slipped it under his arm and walked inside. Tasha was setting plates on the table. The kids were laughing in the living room. He looked at her, then at the envelope, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he slid it quietly under the stack of unpaid bills without opening it. He thought he had chosen patience. He thought waiting for the right moment to open that envelope would keep his family safe. But the truth? What sat inside that plain white paper would soon rip open the life they had built and reveal a danger neither of them were prepared for. The envelope stayed hidden under bills for 3 more days. Marcus told himself he would deal with it later. Right now, his focus was on Carter, the man who had promised him protection, the man who wasn't answering his calls. Finally, on a Thursday evening, Carter picked up. His voice was different. Short, clipped, professional. "Marcus, I told you it was reviewed. Hayes is cleared. Best thing you can do now is move on." Move on. The words burned like acid. Marcus tried to argue, tried to remind Carter of their history, their neighborhood, their families. But Carter's tone only grew colder. "Look, man, don't make this harder than it is. You keep pushing, you're just going to make yourself a target. Let it go." Then the line went dead. That night, Marcus sat on the porch with his head in his hands. Tasha joined him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't have to. What she said instead was worse. "So what now, Marcus? If the system won't protect us, who will?" Marcus had no answer. The following week, something strange happened. At work, Marcus was called into the manager's office. His supervisor, Mr. Keene, looked uneasy. "I don't know what's going on, Marcus, but I've been told to keep an eye on you. Something about conduct outside of work." Marcus froze. "By who?" Keene hesitated. Then he shook his head. "Doesn't matter. Just, keep your head down, all right?" It didn't take much to guess where the warning had come from. Meanwhile, the patrol car kept appearing. Hayes was bold now. He parked across from their driveway some nights, window rolled down, eyes fixed on the house. When Marcus stepped outside, Hayes didn't look away, didn't move. He just sat there, smirking faintly, as if daring him to cross the street. Tasha begged him to ignore it. "He wants you to snap. Don't give him that." But inside, Marcus felt the walls pressing in. He had tried the right way. He had filed the complaint. He had trusted Carter. And now? The system wasn't just dismissing him. It was watching him. One night, as Marcus flipped through the stack of mail, his hand froze on the plain white envelope. Still unopened, still waiting. He carried it upstairs to the bedroom. Tasha was already asleep. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at it under the dim lamp. No stamp, no return address, just his name, written in black ink. He slipped a finger under the flap, then stopped. Because in that moment his phone buzzed. A text, from an unknown number. It read, "Open it when you're ready to know the truth. But be careful. Truth has consequences." For weeks, Marcus had thought the envelope was nothing, a mistake, a bill. But the truth was that it held the first piece of evidence that his family had already been marked, and once he opened it, there would be no going back. Do you think Marcus should open that envelope now, or wait? Tell me in the comments. And if you're not subscribed, hit it now, because when he finally tears that flap open, the secret inside will pull him deeper into a storm he never saw coming. The envelope had waited long enough. That night, Marcus sat alone in the kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. Tasha was upstairs, asleep, or at least pretending to be. He turned the envelope over one last time. Then he tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No letterhead, no signature, just words printed in blocky black letters. "Officer Hayes is untouchable. Walk away or you'll lose everything." Marcus frowned. At first he thought it was some kind of threat, but as his eyes scanned the page again, he noticed something else, an address scribbled in pen at the bottom, a rundown apartment complex on the other side of Raleigh. No explanation, just the address. The next morning, Marcus showed the paper to Tasha. Her first instinct was fear. "Marcus, this isn't a warning, it's bait. Someone wants you to show up there." Marcus shook his head. "Or someone wants us to know something. Why else would they risk leaving this in our mailbox?" She grabbed his arm, her voice breaking. "You said we'd do this the right way. Filing the complaint, trusting the system, that was supposed to be enough. If you go chasing shadows, they'll bury us." Marcus didn't argue, but he folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his wallet, because deep down, he knew he couldn't ignore it. 2 days later, he drove to the address, alone. The complex looked abandoned, graffiti, broken windows, doors chained shut. He was about to turn back when a man stepped from the shadows, older, wiry, his face lined with years of hard living. He looked Marcus over before speaking in a gravelly voice. "You shouldn't be here." Marcus steadied himself. "You put this in my mailbox?" The man smirked faintly. "If I did, it's because I know what Hayes is, and I know what happens to people who cross him." Marcus demanded answers, but the man didn't give much. Just fragments. Hayes wasn't acting alone. Complaints against him didn't disappear. They were buried. Someone higher up made sure of it. And then one final line before the man slipped back into the shadows. "If you want proof, check who signs off on the reviews. It's not Hayes you should be worried about. It's who protects him." Marcus drove home in silence, gripping the wheel until his knuckles whitened. When he walked through the door, Tasha was waiting, arms crossed. She didn't need to ask where he'd been. All he said was, "It's bigger than Hayes, Tosh. Someone's covering for him. Someone with power." Tasha's face went pale, and for the first time she whispered the thought Marcus hadn't dared to say out loud. What if Carter's in on it? Marcus thought he was up against one corrupt cop, but the truth? He was staring at the edge of a web so wide that pulling on one thread could strangle his entire family. And the question now wasn't just who Hayes was, it was who was protecting him. It started with the patrol car idling at the end of their street. Then came the drive-bys, headlights flooding their windows late at night, tires slowing just enough to be heard, to be felt. But Hayes wasn't satisfied with shadows, not anymore. One evening, Tasha stopped at the grocery store on her way home. She pushed her cart through the aisles, gathering cereal, fruit, the everyday pieces of a normal life. That's when she saw him, Hayes, leaning against the end cap of the dairy section, arms crossed, staring directly at her. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just smiled, slow, deliberate, as she froze in the aisle. A mother with 2 kids brushed past, unaware of the silent standoff. The world around them went on as if nothing was happening. But to Tasha, time had stopped. She abandoned the cart, grabbed her purse, and walked straight out of the store. By the time she reached her car, Hayes was gone. When she told Marcus that night, he slammed his fist against the table so hard the plates rattled. "He's taunting us. He wants you scared. He wants me angry." Tasha's eyes glistened. And it's working. The next morning, Marcus left for work early, but 2 blocks from the warehouse, flashing lights filled his rearview mirror. Hayes again. Marcus pulled over, jaw clenched. Hayes approached the car with a swagger, tapping his flashlight against the glass. "Morning, Marcus. Late for work?" Marcus said nothing. Hayes leaned down, his voice low. "Word of advice, quit poking around. You keep stirring, and maybe I forget which paperwork clears your name, or buries it." He tapped the hood twice, then walked back to his cruiser without writing a ticket, as if the stop had never happened. That night, Marcus told Tasha everything. Her face drained of color. "He knows you've been asking questions. Marcus, he knows about the envelope." Marcus nodded. "Which means someone told him. Which means Carter." The room fell into silence. For a few weeks they tried to return to normal. Marcus worked. Tasha counseled her students. They cooked dinner, helped with homework, tucked the kids into bed. But normalcy was an illusion, because every time Marcus stepped outside, Hayes's car was somewhere close. Every time Tasha stopped at a light, she checked her mirrors twice. And then, one Sunday morning, it happened. As they walked out of church hand in hand, Hayes was waiting across the street, uniform pressed, sunglasses reflecting the sunlight. He raised his hand, not in a wave, but in a mock salute, a gesture so small, so casual, but loaded with menace. And Marcus understood the message clearly. I see you. I own this ground. You can't escape me. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was domination, and the more Marcus resisted, the tighter Hayes pulled the leash. What Marcus didn't know yet was that Hayes wasn't acting alone in these games. Someone else was feeding him, watching them, waiting. The fight started over nothing. A misplaced set of car keys, a rushed morning, the kind of small frustration every couple knows. But when Tasha snapped, "You're always distracted lately," Marcus fired back, louder than he meant to. The kids froze at the breakfast table. The room went silent. Marcus regretted it instantly. But the truth was, Tasha wasn't wrong. He was distracted, obsessed, because every sound outside their window made his chest tighten. Every late shift at work felt like an opportunity for Hayes to strike. And the tension wasn't just in his head. It was bleeding into every corner of their home. That afternoon, Marcus drove past the warehouse to clear his mind. He ended up at a park on the south side of Raleigh. Families played on the swings. Couples walked hand in hand. For a moment, life looked normal again. Then he saw it. The patrol car, parked at the edge of the lot. Hayes, sitting behind the wheel, eyes locked on Marcus. Marcus's fists clenched on the steering wheel. His whole body screamed to confront him, to walk over, drag him out of that cruiser, and end it right there. But he didn't. Instead, he drove home, silent, jaw tight, pulse racing. That night, Marcus sat at the kitchen table long after the kids were asleep. The envelope, the one with the warning, lay unfolded in front of him. Tasha joined him, leaning against the counter. "You're scaring me, Marcus," she whispered. "This thing is consuming you. What if that's exactly what they want?" Marcus looked up at her, his eyes raw. "Then what do you want me to do, Tash? Pretend it's not happening? Pretend Hayes isn't watching us, waiting for me to slip?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I want you here. I want our family safe. I don't want to bury you." Her voice cracked on the last word, and Marcus realized she wasn't just afraid of Hayes. She was afraid of him, too, afraid of what he might become under this pressure. The next morning, they tried again. Smiles for the kids, light jokes over breakfast, a fragile attempt at normal. But normal shattered that evening. When Marcus returned from work, he found the front door slightly open. His stomach dropped. Inside, the living room looked untouched. The kids' toys were where they had left them. The television remote sat neatly on the table. But on the kitchen counter, in the same spot the envelope had once rested, there was something new. A single photograph. Tasha and the kids, taken from outside their house, through the window, and scrawled across the bottom in black marker, "Next time, we come inside." Marcus's hands shook as he picked up the photo. Tasha entered the room behind him, and when she saw it, she covered her mouth to stifle a scream. He pulled her close, holding her tighter than ever before. But in his mind, one thought cut through the fear like glass. "This isn't just Hayes anymore. Someone else is inside our world." The narrator's voice drops low, tense, almost a whisper. The walls of safety were gone. Hayes had crossed the line, and whoever stood behind him wanted Marcus to break. The question wasn't if he would snap, it was when. And when that moment came, it would set into motion a chain of events no one could stop. Up until now, the audience thinks this is a battle of Marcus versus Hayes. But here, we peel back the first big layer, The corruption reaches higher, and Marcus realizes he's been betrayed by someone he trusted. The suspense spikes, and the audience should feel like the ground has just shifted under their feet. The photo didn't leave Marcus's hands for days. He carried it in his wallet, pulled it out on his lunch breaks, stared at it late into the night when sleep wouldn't come. That snapshot wasn't just a threat. It was proof. Proof that Hayes, or someone tied to him, had been inside their yard, inches from their children, bold enough to leave evidence behind. And that meant Hayes wasn't acting alone. Marcus thought back to the warning in the envelope. Hayes is untouchable. Walk away, or you'll lose everything. Those words haunted him now. Because whoever had written them hadn't been exaggerating. They had been predicting. The question Marcus couldn't shake was, who knew enough to warn him? And why hadn't they stepped forward again? He decided to test the only connection he had left, Detective Carter. That Friday he drove to the precinct unannounced. He walked straight past the front desk, ignoring the receptionist's protests, and stormed down the hall until he found Carter's office. Carter looked up, startled. "Marcus, what the hell are you doing here?" Marcus slammed the photo on the desk. "Don't play dumb. You told me to file the complaint. You told me it would go to the right people. Now Hayes is in my life, my house, threatening my kids. Tell me this isn't on you." Carter stared at the photo for a long time. His expression didn't change. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Marcus, you need to leave this alone. For your own good." Marcus's blood boiled. "So that's it? You just sit behind this desk and let him terrorize families? You let him win?" Carter leaned forward, his voice low, sharp. "You don't get it. Hayes isn't the one you should be worried about." Marcus froze. Before he could ask what that meant, a knock came at the office door. Another officer stepped in, whispered something to Carter, then handed him a file. Carter slid it into his drawer without opening it, but Marcus had seen enough. On the cover of that file, his own name. His stomach dropped. Carter wasn't protecting him. Carter was watching him, feeding information back to someone else. Marcus left the precinct, his heart pounding. That night, he told Tasha everything. Her hands shook as she listened. "So Carter was never with us. He's been against us this whole time." Marcus nodded, anger burning in his chest. "And if he's covering for Hayes, then this goes deeper than just one bad cop. This is a network, a machine." Tasha whispered the words neither of them wanted to say out loud. "Then we're not safe anywhere." Later that night, Marcus sat alone in the living room, staring at the photo again. But this time something new caught his eye, a reflection in the window behind Tasha and the kids. It wasn't Hayes. It was Carter. Marcus thought his enemy wore a uniform and a smirk, but the real betrayal, the real danger, was sitting in an office, wearing the face of a friend. And the moment Marcus realized that, the story stopped being about survival and became a fight for truth. Marcus couldn't unsee it. The reflection in the photograph wasn't an accident. It was Carter. His shape, his stance, standing outside their window the night the photo was taken. That wasn't just betrayal. That was participation. The next morning, Marcus drove by Carter's house. It was quiet, the kind of suburban calm that mocked him now. A manicured lawn, kids' bikes in the driveway, a wind chime swaying gently in the breeze. How could the man who'd eaten at his table, who'd shaken hands with his family, also be the man feeding Hayes the tools to destroy them? Marcus sat in his car across the street, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles whitened. He wanted to knock on the door, demand answers, scream until Carter's wife and kids heard the truth. But he didn't, because he knew what would happen next. They'd call it harassment. They'd call it intimidation. And Marcus would be the one in handcuffs. That night Marcus confided in Tasha. Her voice shook as she asked, "So who do we turn to now? If the complaint system is rigged, if Carter is feeding him, if Hayes has the freedom to stalk us, where do we go?" Marcus had no answer. For the first time, he realized there might not be anywhere to go. A week passed. The tension grew unbearable. At work, co-workers stopped talking when Marcus walked by. Whispers trailed him in the break room. And one afternoon, his supervisor, Mr. Keene, pulled him aside again. "Marcus, listen, I don't know what you're caught up in, but I've been told to start a file on you. Someone's watching. Someone wants dirt." Marcus's chest tightened. "From who?" Keene shook his head. "Orders from above, that's all I know. Just be careful." That evening, Marcus parked a block away from his house before walking home. He scanned the street, searching for Hayes's cruiser. Instead, he spotted something worse. A second patrol car, not Hayes's. Inside, 2 officers he didn't recognize, watching his house. Marcus's blood ran cold. This wasn't just Hayes anymore. This was coordinated. Hayes was the face, but someone else was pulling strings, making sure the Green family was surrounded, cornered, suffocating under surveillance. When Marcus stepped inside, Tasha was sitting at the table. The envelope lay unfolded between them again, like it had never left. Her voice was low, defeated. "They're not going to stop, Marcus. Not until we break. Not until you give them what they want." Marcus sat across from her, the weight of every choice pressing down on him. "And if I don't?" Her eyes glistened as she whispered, "Then they'll take everything." That night, long after Tasha went to bed, Marcus pulled the photo out once more. His eyes stayed locked on Carter's reflection. For weeks, Hayes had been the monster in plain sight. But now Marcus knew the real danger wasn't the uniform in the cruiser. It was the badge behind the desk. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was systemic. And Marcus wasn't up against one man anymore. He was up against a machine. Every move Marcus made was being tracked. Every word fed back to the same machine that had declared Hayes untouchable. And Marcus understood something he hadn't before. This wasn't just survival. This was war. And the first shot hadn't been fired yet. If you were Marcus, would you expose Carter publicly or keep this discovery quiet for now? Let me know in the comments, and subscribe now. Because Hayes is about to make his boldest move yet, one that forces Marcus into a choice he can't take back. It started with the little things. The car parked just a bit too close to Marcus's driveway every night. The strange hang-up calls at 2 a.m., the silence on the other end stretching into his chest like an echo. The feeling that his trash cans were always overturned in the morning, though he'd lined them neatly the night before. But Hayes wasn't satisfied with whispers. He wanted a spectacle. One Tuesday evening, Marcus and Tasha were coming home from the grocery store. The trunk of their car full of bags, their youngest tugging at his mother's sleeve, asking for ice cream. That's when Hayes's cruiser rolled up. He didn't flash his lights. He didn't need to. He just parked diagonally across the Greens' front yard, blocking the driveway, daring Marcus to react. Neighbors peeked out through curtains, porch lights flicked on, and Hayes, with a smirk, leaned against his car as though he owned the block. Marcus whispered to Tasha, "Take the kids inside, now." But Hayes called out loud enough for the entire street to hear. "Evening, Marcus. Heard you've been making complaints, causing a fuss." Marcus froze. His son clutched tighter to Tasha's hand, confusion in his eyes. Hayes stepped closer, resting one hand casually on the grip of his holstered gun. "Tell me, Marcus, do you think anyone's gonna believe you over me? Do you?" The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was suffocating. Tasha ushered the kids through the door, but Marcus couldn't move. His chest rose and fell, his fists trembling by his sides. Every nerve in his body screamed to fight back, but one glance at the curtains twitching, at the phones raised to record, reminded him of the trap. This wasn't just intimidation, it was performance. Hayes wanted an audience. The next day, Marcus went to work late. His mind was still replaying every second, every smirk, every word. But the whispers followed him there too. A co-worker muttered as he walked by, "That's the guy who got checked by the cops last night." Someone else snickered, Better keep your head down, Marcus. Don't want to make him mad again. And in that moment, Marcus realized Hayes wasn't just attacking him in the street. He was dragging his name through the mud everywhere he turned. That evening, Marcus sat at the table again, the envelope between them, the photograph of Carter staring back at him. Tasha broke the silence first. "We can't live like this, Marcus. The kids are scared to go outside. I jump every time the phone rings. And now the neighbors look at us like we're the problem." Her voice cracked. "You need to do something, before Hayes takes more." Marcus swallowed hard. He wanted to promise her it would end, that the storm would pass, that justice would prevail. But how could he, when the very people sworn to protect him were the ones choking the life out of his family? He looked at the photo again. Carter, Hayes, the machine. And for the first time, Marcus admitted something he had been burying deep inside. If he wanted to protect his family, he might have to break the law to do it. The lines between right and wrong were fading. Hayes had made sure of that, and Marcus knew the next move would either save his family or destroy them completely. It happened on a Wednesday morning. Marcus was drinking cold coffee at the kitchen table, his eyes bloodshot from another sleepless night. He scrolled aimlessly on his phone, half expecting another anonymous threat, another smear against his name. But what appeared instead made him freeze. A headline. "Leaked documents expose ties between Officer Hayes and Internal Affairs investigator." Beneath it, grainy images, copies of emails, memos, timestamps. And in one of the photographs attached, a name glared back at Marcus like a knife twisting deeper into his chest. Carter. The article detailed a secret relationship, Carter and Hayes exchanging information off the books, coordinating complaints, and scrubbing reports. Worse, it alleged that Carter had been paid quiet transfers, hidden in contracts funneled through shell organizations. The document suggested Hayes wasn't just being protected, he was being sponsored. Marcus dropped his phone. Tasha rushed into the kitchen, alarmed. "What is it? What's wrong?" He couldn't even speak at first. He just pointed at the screen. She read silently. Her hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. By noon, the story had spread like wildfire. Local news stations covered it. Social media lit up with outrage. Neighbors who once whispered in secret now talked loudly on the sidewalks, pointing fingers not at Marcus, but at Hayes. For the first time, Marcus wasn't the villain in their story. Hayes was. But relief didn't come, because the leak didn't bring justice. It brought chaos. That same night, Hayes showed up again, not in uniform this time, not in his cruiser. He came in plain clothes, pacing outside Marcus's yard, a storm in his eyes. His voice was low, venomous. "You think this changes anything? You think a few emails are going to bring me down? No, Marcus, this only makes it worse for you." His hand tightened into a fist at his side. He didn't touch Marcus. He didn't need to. The threat was already made. The next morning, Carter was temporarily reassigned. That was the official phrase. But Marcus knew better. Carter wasn't gone. He was just being shielded until the storm blew over. And Hayes? He was still on the street, still armed, still circling. Time. Marcus had proof the system was crumbling from within. But proof didn't equal safety. Proof didn't stop the man standing outside his yard at midnight. And proof wouldn't matter if Hayes decided tonight was the night to make his move. The town of Raleigh hadn't seen protests like this in years. By Friday, the courthouse steps were overflowing with signs and chants. On one side, a sea of raised fists demanding accountability, shouting Hayes's name with venom. On the other, a counter crowd wrapped in flags, shouting back, defending their officer, claiming the leak was a smear campaign. The streets weren't just noisy, they were boiling. Marcus watched it all from his living room window. News cameras rolled. Helicopters buzzed overhead. His neighborhood, once quiet, ordinary, was now a fault line in a battle tearing through the city. For the first time, Marcus realized his fight with Hayes wasn't just his anymore. It had become everyone's fight. But that didn't bring comfort, because when the crowds weren't at the courthouse, they came to his street. Supporters left notes on his fence. "Stay strong, Marcus. We're with you." Others threw trash into his yard, screaming, "Liar! You're trying to ruin a good man!" The front yard turned into a stage for strangers' anger. His family became unwilling symbols. And every knock at the door, every unfamiliar car slowing down, carried the weight of potential danger. One evening, Tasha pulled Marcus aside. Her voice shook. "I can't keep the kids here, Marcus. It's not safe. They're scared to go to school. They hear the shouting, they see the cameras. This isn't home anymore. It's a battlefield." Marcus closed his eyes. He wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her they had to stay strong, to hold their ground. But he couldn't deny the truth. Hayes hadn't just attacked their family. He had turned the entire town into a weapon. Meanwhile, Hayes thrived in the chaos. He made public appearances, shaking hands, smiling for cameras. To his supporters, he was a man under attack, a hero being targeted by lies. To his enemies, he was proof of a corrupt system rotting from the inside. And through it all, Hayes's smirk never wavered. That weekend, Marcus received a letter. No return address. Inside was a single sentence, written in bold, messy ink. "They won't stop until one of you is gone." No signature, no explanation, just a threat. Tasha begged Marcus to take it to the police. He laughed bitterly. Which police, Tasha? His friends, his allies, the same people who protected him this long? For once, she didn't argue, because she knew he was right. The town was split, the law was compromised, and Marcus stood at the center, carrying the weight of a fight he never asked for. But when a system refuses to protect you, how far are you willing to go to protect yourself? The courthouse was packed before the doors even opened. Lines of people stretched down the sidewalk, some holding signs demanding Hayes's removal, others chanting his name as if he were some kind of savior. Reporters jostled for position, cameras flashing with every movement. And in the middle of it all, Marcus walked up the stone steps with Tasha at his side, their hands clenched tightly together. He had never felt smaller. Inside, the courtroom buzzed like a hive. Every seat was filled. Supporters and critics sat shoulder to shoulder, glaring, whispering, waiting. At the front, Judge Mallory sat behind the bench, her expression unreadable, her gavel resting like a weapon waiting to be swung. And then the doors opened again. Hayes walked in. He wasn't in uniform. He wore a suit, polished, perfect, like a man ready for a press conference, not a disciplinary hearing. And as he passed by Marcus, he tilted his head just enough for only Marcus to hear, "You don't belong here. I do." Then he smiled for the cameras. The hearing began. Attorneys spoke in polished tones, throwing around words like procedure and protocol. They presented evidence, arguments, counter-arguments. But beneath the legal jargon, one truth cut through. This wasn't just about Hayes. It was about Marcus's word versus the machine. When Marcus was called to the stand, his heart pounded so loudly he thought the microphone might catch it. The attorney asked him to recount that night. The night of the harassment, the moment Hayes turned his yard into a stage. Marcus's voice cracked at first, but then he steadied himself. "He wasn't just intimidating me. He was humiliating me. In front of my children, in front of my neighbors. He wanted everyone to see it. He wanted to remind me that the law wasn't mine to rely on. It was his to bend." The room fell silent. For one brief moment, Marcus felt the weight shift. People were listening, but Hayes's attorney rose with a smirk. "Mr. Green, are you aware that your neighbor, Investigator Carter, filed a report citing you as hostile, erratic, and aggressive? That he witnessed behavior suggesting you were the one provoking Officer Hayes?" Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Marcus froze. His stomach dropped. Carter again. Even after the leak, even after the reassignment, Carter's shadow loomed large. Hayes leaned back in his chair, arms folded, smirk firmly in place. The attorney pressed harder. So tell us, Mr. Green, should this court believe the word of a man with a clean record and decades of service? Or should we take your account, when even your own neighbors question your credibility? The words cut deep. The crowd murmured. And Marcus, gripping the edges of the witness stand, realized he wasn't just fighting Hayes anymore. He was fighting perception itself. In that courtroom, Marcus wasn't just testifying against a man. He was testifying against a system that had already decided who was worthy of belief, and with every word, the noose tightened. The gavel struck. The courtroom rose, papers shuffled, chairs scraped, and voices filled the chamber. But for Marcus, the sound blurred into a dull roar. There was no conviction, no suspension. The ruling was simple, almost casual. Insufficient evidence. Hayes walked out a free man. Outside the courthouse, the world erupted. Protesters clashed. Police lined the streets. Reporters shouted questions Marcus couldn't answer. Tasha gripped his hand so tightly it hurt. Their children clung to her side, wide-eyed, frightened. Marcus stared at the cameras, at the shouting faces, at Hayes smiling for microphones like nothing had changed. And in that moment, Marcus understood the cruelest truth of all. Sometimes, justice isn't denied. It's delayed, until someone forces it. That night, their home was quiet. Too quiet. Tasha put the kids to bed, her face pale, exhausted. Marcus sat alone at the kitchen table. The envelope still lay there. The photo still showed Carter's reflection. The documents still screamed corruption. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. Because Marcus knew what came next wasn't going to happen in a courtroom. He walked to the window. Outside, a cruiser idled at the end of the street. Hayes's silhouette leaned back in the driver's seat, waiting, watching. Marcus clenched his fists. His chest rose and fell in slow, heavy breaths. He didn't move. He didn't blink. The war wasn't over. It had only changed arenas. The system had spoken, but the fight wasn't finished. Hayes was still out there. Marcus was still standing. And in a town divided, the question wasn't whether justice would come, but who would deliver it first. Days blurred together after the ruling. Marcus went to work. He came home. He ate dinner in silence. He tucked the kids into bed. But he wasn't really there. He was somewhere else, trapped inside the echo of the judge's words. Insufficient evidence. The world had seen the documents. The world had seen Hayes humiliate him. And still, nothing changed. On the fifth night after the verdict, Marcus stood alone on the porch. The street was quiet. The air was thick. And there he was again. Hayes, sitting in the cruiser at the corner, engine idling, lights off, watching, always watching. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. His hand curled into a fist against the railing. How long could a man take it before something inside him snapped? Inside, Tasha tried to keep life normal. She cooked meals, helped with homework, smiled at the kids when they asked if the mean officer was gone. But Marcus could see the cracks, the way her hands shook when she washed the dishes, the way she startled at every car door outside, the way she avoided meeting his eyes when the cruiser appeared again. She didn't want to say it out loud, but Marcus knew. She was afraid of him, not just Hayes, Marcus. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, the envelope open in front of him like always, the photograph, the documents, the evidence that should have been enough. And then his eyes shifted, to the drawer, the one he never opened, the one that held a cold, heavy answer to a question he'd been avoiding for weeks. He opened it. The gun sat there, silent, waiting. Marcus stared at it, his breath shallow, his reflection warped in the barrel. For the first time, he let the thought in. What if this is the only way? The narrator's voice sharpens, leaving the question hanging, unresolved but heavy. The law had failed him. The system had mocked him. And Hayes wasn't just a threat anymore. He was a constant. The question was no longer whether Marcus could survive. The question was how far he was willing to go to make it stop. The gun was back in the drawer, but the thought didn't leave. It clung to Marcus like a shadow, following him from room to room, from sunrise to sunset. Every time he saw Hayes's cruiser at the corner, the shadow grew darker. One evening, Marcus sat on the porch with his eldest son, Jamal. The boy was quiet, kicking at the steps, avoiding his father's eyes. Finally, he whispered, "Dad, why do the cops hate us?" Marcus froze. His throat tightened. There were 100 answers he could have given: history, power, injustice. But none of them mattered in that moment. What mattered was the fear in his son's voice, the fear Hayes had planted. Marcus swallowed hard. They don't all hate us, but some want us scared, and we can't give them that. Jamal nodded slowly, but his eyes didn't shine with belief. They shined with doubt. And that was the moment Marcus realized. Hayes wasn't just after him. He was after the future of his children. That night, Marcus told Tasha the truth. "I thought about it, about using the gun." Her eyes widened, tears forming instantly. "Marcus, no. Please, no." "What am I supposed to do, Tasha? He's not stopping. The system's protecting him. And now the kids, they're carrying this. Every day." She shook her head, her voice breaking. "If you do that, he wins. He makes you the criminal. He takes everything we've fought to hold together." Marcus looked at her, searching for certainty, but found only fear. The next morning, Marcus drove downtown. He didn't go to work. He didn't go to the courthouse. He went to a community center where a crowd had gathered. On one side of the street, supporters of Hayes chanting, holding signs that read, "Back the Blue." On the other, protesters, demanding justice, demanding change, shouting Marcus's name like a rallying cry. For the first time, Marcus saw himself as more than a victim. He was a symbol, a face people looked to, for hope or for blame. And standing in the middle of the chaos, Marcus asked himself a question he wasn't ready to answer. Am I going to be their proof or their warning? That night, the cruiser didn't idle at the corner. It parked right in front of Marcus's house. Hayes stepped out, leaning against the hood, staring at the front door. No words, no gestures, just presence. And in that silence, Marcus felt the line being drawn. Hayes wasn't hiding anymore. He was daring Marcus to cross it. The narrator's tone lowers, sharp, like a blade being unsheathed. Every man has a breaking point. For Marcus, it wasn't about fear anymore. It wasn't even about survival. It was about deciding which side of that line he was willing to stand on, and how much of himself he was willing to sacrifice once he crossed it. Hayes didn't move. He leaned against the hood of his cruiser, arms crossed, boots planted, eyes locked on Marcus's front door. It wasn't a visit. It was a challenge. Inside the house, Tasha pulled the curtains shut. "Ignore him," she whispered. "Please, just ignore him." But Marcus couldn't. His kids were upstairs, whispering, asking why the bad cop was outside again. His neighbors stood on porches, peeking out, phones in hand, waiting to see what would happen. The whole block was holding its breath. Marcus stepped out onto the porch. The screen door creaked. The night air hit his chest. Hayes didn't flinch. His stare followed Marcus with every step, as if daring him closer. "Evening," Hayes finally said, his voice low, steady, smug. "Just making sure everything's safe in the neighborhood." Marcus clenched his fists at his sides. He wanted to shout. He wanted to break the silence with the truth. About the documents, about the cover-ups, about the courtroom that had turned its back. But he said nothing. Hayes smirked. "Cat got your tongue? Or maybe you've finally learned your place." The words cut deeper than fists ever could. Marcus took one step off the porch, then another, then another. The crowd of neighbors murmured, phones lifted, recording every second. Hayes shifted off the hood, hand resting on his belt. Not his gun. Not yet. But close enough. Marcus stopped just a few feet away. Their eyes locked. For a moment it felt like the whole world had shrunk to Cedar Street. One man pushing, another man refusing to break. "Leave my family alone," Marcus said, his voice low, steady. "You've done enough." Hayes tilted his head, that same crooked smile spreading. "Or what?" A silence stretched between them, thick, dangerous, alive. Marcus's hand twitched, not toward the gun in the drawer inside. Not yet. But the possibility was there, visible in the way his body tensed, in the way Hayes's fingers hovered near his holster. And then a car door slammed at the far end of the block. Reporters, cameras, lights flaring in the dark. The story was no longer just between Marcus and Hayes. The confrontation had an audience now. Hayes's smirk faltered. Marcus's pulse thundered. This was no longer intimidation. This was escalation, and once the world saw it, there would be no going back. Two men, one street, one truth between them. The law had failed, the cameras had arrived, and in that moment Marcus had to decide, was this the fight for his family, or the war for his soul? If you were Marcus, standing face to face with Hayes under the camera's glare, would you expose the truth or let your rage take control? Comment your answer below. And subscribe now, because Chapter 19 will decide whether Marcus's silence protects him or destroys him.